One word to describe Brett Dillon. How about wow? I actually made a film called The Range about the radio station where Brett worked, and I wasn't terribly satisfied with it. Neither was anybody else for that matter. But the one thing, after I looked at it over and over and over again, the one thing that just stood out was Brett. And Brett's story is pretty compelling. I actually worked in radio for 2 years. Absolutely hated it. The one thing that you learn early in radio is how much it's like the movie Groundhog Day. I mean, every day it tends to be the same thing. And anyone who is in that business, I think it takes a very, very special person to want to work in radio, someone like Brett Dillon. Well, let me just say I've always believed in the three-act structure, and that's because primarily I consider myself a writer and not a filmmaker, and I'm used to and I'm comfortable with the three-act structure. So in every film I've done, this is my 5th film, I've always worked around that three-act structure, and I did the same thing for Hey Dillon, the story of the last great DJ. At the time, in the mid-'70s, you still had to have, in essence, an engineering license to work at a radio station and actually be a DJ. And part of the job of the engineer was to calibrate the signal. And the way that you calibrated the signal is you actually climbed the transmission tower, and there were calibration tools that you used, and you coordinated with someone on the ground. So the first act is climbing the tower. I wanted the first act to really focus on Brett's career as a disc jockey and how, in essence, he traveled a huge circle around this country. Starting in Dallas, and then going to Nebraska, and then going to Florida and Wyoming, and back to Nebraska. And this is true of people in the radio business. In order to be successful, you have to be able to make that commitment, and I really wanted to show that in the first act. I liked working with the singer-songwriters because their songs and their lyrics propel this movie forward. I wanted to do something different in the second act. I really felt that the first act was as traditional as I can get in making a documentary film, but I wanted the second act to be something a little bit more. And the story of Faust was the first thing that popped into my head for that second act, so we called it The Devil and Brett Dillon. The whole story behind Brett's suicide attempt early in his career was fascinating to me, but it was hard to get it out of Brett. So what we did was I just gave Brett a camera and said, well, I tell you what, when you feel comfortable talking about it, go ahead and do that. Number one, I hope we've introduced people to perhaps a genre of music, an artist that they're not familiar with at all. But I hope we've also introduced people to what is becoming a lost art in this country, the DJ. They're craftsmen from the perspective that they use these tools, the computer, if you will, in order to manipulate songs to reflect a mood. They're artists from the perspective that they're able to weave a story during the music that's being played. And to me, there is one great DJ left in this country, and that's Brett Dillon.